Neither I nor anybody else not involved in the case knows what's in the documents yet. But I do know what kinds of documents were put in front of the president during my time, I'm sure during the entire 4 years of his term. And they did go to the most important secrets that the United States has, directly affecting national security, directly affecting the lives and safety of our service members and our civilian population.
Many months later,
John Bolton, Ambassador Bolton's security clearances were stripped earlier this year by President Trump. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, took that security clearance away. They had concerns, the administration had concerns about Ambassador Bolton still being able to access some of these documents and have some of those security clearances. It's also notable that John Bolton had a security detail as well. Because of the threats from Iran on his life, that security detail, that government federal paid security detail, was also taken away by President Trump.
So the Democrat Party and their connected arm in the pro-war, pro-establishment mainstream media are completely losing their minds this morning after the Trump FBI, led by Kash Patel, just staged a raid at the home of John Bolton, who is, of course, Trump's former national security advisor and a lifelong neocon and underminer of American interests worldwide. And it's, of course, first of all, hysterical to watch the amnesia on this subject because they are unironically, with a straight face, going out there and claiming that this is unprecedented. You cannot use the FBI against your political opponents. You're raiding the homes of former government officials. What a dangerous precedent for democracy. This is the weaponization of government, to which we all say, really? Really? You know, and hilariously, you have people like Scott Jennings using their own words against them, bringing up the very coverage, the very reactions of these people, including that of John Bolton, the moment that apparently everyone has forgotten. Not only did the FBI raid Mar-A-Lago very infamously back in 2022, they brought 4 criminal indictments, but oh, you're not allowed to use justice against your political opponents, right? So that's funny on one hand, but I'd also like to point out how this moment and this reaction by Democrats, by the mainstream media, really does represent a greater political realignment, because we should not only just remember what they were saying about the Trump raid on Mar-a-Lago back in 2022, we ought to also take into account what they were saying about John Bolton for decades here in the United States. So that said, we'll get into it. We'll give you all of the details as well as the pretty hysterical reactions to, again, the FBI raid on the home of John Bolton in today's video. First, though, folks, do us a favor. As usual, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Subscribing is not only the best way to support our videos, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And with that said, so let us first of all give you the details of what we know about this raid thus far, and then I want to talk about John Bolton, because we should not forget exactly who this is. But first of all, this appears to be connected to the current Obamagate counterprobe, and apparently there's something here having to do with national defense information, potentially classified documents, or could also be the fact, frankly, that I think it's completely possible that while John Bolton was serving in the government, specifically in Trump's government, he may have been actively leaking state secrets or undermining American foreign policy or interests for reasons we'll lay out in a second. We don't know. This is all speculation. But that said, this sounds like it could be pretty serious. After all, don't you know, classified documents are really important, guys. Oh, no, they're not. It's just petty. Oh, is that why you tried to bring criminal indictments against Trump, even though he has presidential immunity, right? He's a former president. So anyways, take a listen. Here's what we know about the raid so far, and then we'll continue.
It's intriguing here because these are long-standing allegations that the book indicated or referenced classified material that he may have acquired when he was in the administration. We're not clear as to what that is, but it would suggest that it could be national defense information. The reason that's important is that creates a heightened potential penalty. So you can have penalties that range from 5 to 20 years. 20 years tends to be the sentences for concealing information, obstructing justice. Simply having classified information can weigh in at about 10 years. And there are often multiple counts because each of those documents can be charged separately. So there is a strange history here. So you had these allegations coming out as early as the first Trump administration. Then there was an allegation that the Biden administration essentially scuttled a further look at this case. Right. And now we have this new development. But we really don't know if there's something that has occurred most recently, whether they uncovered something that they believed is sort of evergreen, that this is still a viable criminal case.
Yeah, well, if the case is no longer evergreen, if the statute of limitations or whatever has expired, I learned from Letitia James and Alvin Bragg in New York that you can just extend that. Right? You can just change it for no reason, subjectively. Nobody's above the law, by the way, so why don't you just do that? But anyways, all of this in mind, I think it's important to remember who John Bolton is, because this is not just a random former Trump advisor that he no longer likes. This, let's all remember, was one of the top individuals in the Bush administration and one of the chief architects of the Iraq War, alongside characters like Donald Rumsfeld, Bill Kristol, and Dick Cheney and others there. And the reason I bring that up is because as we're about to watch the mainstream media, who decades ago were criticizing the Iraq War, right, criticizing the Bush administration, these are people. John Bolton is someone who Democrats argued for years is a war criminal, and he ought to be put on trial for The Hague for the fact that, after all, he sent hundreds of thousands of people, both Americans and Iraqis and even coalition forces, to their deaths based on a false pretense, right? Based on false intelligence, based on a lie. And that, by the way, happens to be something that I completely agree with. Okay, I see John Bolton as a scumbag. I frankly think it should also be a legitimate case as to why nobody was ever held accountable for the fact that, yes, they dragged us to war based on a lie. But I want you to keep that in mind. Not only is he a neocon, he's one of the neocons, right? One of the people who was responsible for all of this. Apparently now, the big shining jewel of the Democrat Party, right? You're going to have him speak at the DNC, the guy they were calling the freaking war criminal here. And it's very interesting because on one hand, it shows you the political realignment, right? The fact that the Democrat Party in 2025, and you even saw it in 2024 when Liz Cheney was one of the top Kamala surrogates along with Dick Cheney, that this is essentially what the Democrat Party now is, right? Much of the Bush neocons have now flocked to the party. They basically run it, and that's indicative of the fact that they're now defending Bolton. So that's on one hand, and that's why, by the way, I have no sympathy for this guy. I think this guy needs to be held accountable for a lot of the scummy and terrible and awful things he's done in his life. But what specifically is the potential allegation right now when it comes to his involvement later, years down the line, with the first Trump administration? Well, let's remember the timeline here. So obviously, Trump and Bolton never got along very well since the beginning. They were always arguing, but the argument that Trump made for putting him in that position was, well, he's one of the war hawks. I like to hear different perspectives. I want to hear his so I can make the best judgment. Except the issue is, I think you saw this even back then, by the way. It wasn't just a matter of, hey, he has this council of rivals and Bolton kind of disagrees, but, we're all here to kind of, figure out the best idea. No. Bolton, being the snake, being the just bloodthirsty maniac he was actively trying to manipulate and undermine American foreign policy. Not only did he come very close to trying to constantly drag Trump in a war with Iran back in 2020, but the evidence here clearly is that he may have been, first of all, leaking classified information, right? State secrets in his book, in his little anti-Trump media tour. Who knows, by the way, if when it came to diplomatic relations with other countries, North Korea, that summit back in 2018, 2019, coming to mind, how much this guy was actively trying to sabotage and undermine the peace negotiations. Because after all, if this guy architected the Iraq war, who's to say he wasn't also trying to sabotage the talks for peace? So these are all things I think we ought to remember. And one last thing I'd like to point out about this is apparently back in 2005 and 2006. Keep this in mind, because now the Democrats are going to claim this guy's a hero, right? He was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations as a recess appointee by President Bush. He stepped down at the end of his recess appointment in 2006 because he was unlikely to win confirmation in the Senate, of which the Democratic Party had control of at the time. So Democrats, far from viewing this guy as a bipartisan, lifelong patriotic diplomat to this country, viewed him as such a sleazy scumbag, which, by the way, he was. Okay, he's running like USAID-style NGOs advocating for the Iraq war throughout the years. We know what he was doing, all this time. They said, we're not going to confirm him to the Senate. But now then suddenly, John Bolton is an amazing hero to this country, right? So there you have it. All right, with all of that in mind, again, guys, just remember, we're talking about not just likely a traitor to the United States, also a war criminal. That's the argument I would make. Okay, let's hear now how MSNBC is taking it, because it's not going very well. And the irony here is not lost on any of us, both in terms of the way Democrats used to feel about John Bolton and the way they should still feel, the way every American should still feel this guy's a scumbag, but also the fact that apparently the new standard is now that Trump is in power, it's so unprecedented. How dare you have the FBI raid your political opponent's home, right? All right, take a listen.
He thought that the president's summit in Alaska with Vladimir Putin was going to be a disaster. In fact, even before the summit occurred, he said that Trump had handed Putin a win. In fact, Trump went to social media to criticize Bolton for those comments. And now, a few days later, we have this. We don't know there's a link, but we certainly know this is a president who has promised retribution.
Yeah, this is chilling. It really is. Listen, John Bolton and I disagreed on many things back in the days when I was serving in public office, but I don't think very many people that know John Bolton would argue that his beliefs were intellectually sound. You could disagree with him, and that he gave a lot to this country in terms of time and his intellect and his work ethic. And clearly this is retribution. Clearly this is using the FBI in a way that not only tarnishes the FBI, but it tarnishes our country. I mean, this is what they do in countries where they don't have rule of law. This is what happens when despots take over, like Putin. And John Bolton has always been critical of how, I mean, he about lost it when Trump wanted to invite the Taliban to Camp David. It's chilling. Now, do I think they're ever going to have evidence to convict this man of anything in a court of law with a jury? No, they won't. But they can make him miserable.
So first of all, you already hear the change in rhetoric. John Bolton was a patriot who served this country. Even if you didn't agree with him, you have to have respect for the... No, I don't have a respect for a guy, again, who led hundreds of thousands of people to their deaths based on his lies and the lies of many others, all right? And which, by the way, in 2025, when asked, still has no remorse or apology or anything for what he did. Number one. So no, I don't have respect for that. Oh, what's to be respected there? Mass killings? Genocide? That's what I'm supposed to respect?
So you've called for regime change in Iraq, Libya, Iran, and Syria. In the first two countries, we've had regime change, and obviously it's been, I'd say, a disaster. I think we agree.
No, I don't agree with that. And let me.
You don't think it's been a disaster?
No, because to argue that, you have to argue, let's just take Iraq to begin with. From the fall of Saddam Hussein followed inevitably, solely and unalterably from the decision to overthrow him. And that's simply not
I would never argue that. I'm merely arguing the macro picture, since you just said that Iran is the single greatest threat to us and to that region. I think you'll concede that Saddam was the greatest counterbalance to Iran, and they were empowered by his fall. So I think it's fair to say if you think Iran is the real threat that way, it's kind of hard to defend that decision, right?
No, because I think your analysis is simple-minded, frankly.
Secondly, though, you notice the rhetoric, right? This is what happens when despots take over. They raid their political opponents using the FBI. Oh, really? Really? That's really bad, right? This is chilling. It tarnishes our FBI and makes it political. Oh, really, MSNBC? Again, do they just expect us to have total memory loss, right? Nothing in the past 4 years happened. I guess that's the case, but you can see already, right? Trying to spin it, trying to say, first of all, John Bolton is an amazing guy. And secondly, despite not actually knowing the evidence, they don't have the evidence. Trust me. They're just trying to harass him. Oh, really? I mean, if that were the case, that would actually sound awfully familiar to me. You know, that said, take a listen here to how CNN is reacting. Because apparently today, Kash Patel posted this morning about how nobody's above the law. After all, that's what they kept saying, right? Nobody's above the law. Everyone needs to be held accountable. Then JD Vance apparently retweeted it. And they're mad about this. They're mad that we're saying nobody's above the law. Again, total amnesia. Take a listen.
The House still on the scene right now.
Got one interesting tidbit, which is that tweet you just mentioned from FBI Director Kash Patel saying no one is above the law. FBI agents on mission. The Vice President of the United States, JD Vance, just retweeted it. So, again, this is social media sort of play-by-play here.
Yeah.
But you now have the Vice President retweeting this, this statement. Again, it's not specific, but it was put out during the time of this FBI search, with now the Vice President leaning in, which I imagine will only lead to more questions about the timing of this. And
the Attorney General also had retweeted with comments this morning as well.
So political overtones.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's the problem with that statement? And how does it have political undertones? I thought that's just something every American should agree with. Nobody's above the law. It doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter if you're a former president or a former war criminal. Nobody's above the law. That's what we were told, isn't it? No. Is that not the case? Of course, Scott Jennings comes on CNN here to interrupt the constant meltdown and how this is unprecedented. We've never seen something like this before. I don't remember what we were just talking about. Reminding everyone not only about the Mar-A-Lago raid on Trump, but what John Bolton said in response to the Mar-A-Lago raid on Trump. Because, yeah, newsflash, none of this is aging all that well, is it?
Scott, I mean, what do you see here?
Well, I'm reminded of something that I heard someone say after the Mar-a-Lago raid, and the statement was everybody ought to just calm down, whether you're pro-Trump or anti-Trump, and let the process work its way through. That was said by John Bolton himself after the Mar-a-Lago raid on Trump. Look, I try not to engage too much in conjecture on these things. All we really know is what Caitlin just told us, that this is related to an investigation regarding information he put in his book. We know that they're searching for things, and that's it. That's what we know. And so Ambassador Bolton's previous views on this were that processes should be allowed to work their way through. I assume this one will work its way through. And if he has not disclosed any classified information, that will be fine and good. And we'll talk about that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Remember, guys, we have to trust in the justice system. The DOJ is infallible to political influence. And we need to all respect the rule of law in this country and the legal process. Yeah. I'm just repeating what you guys said. That's what we were told. When we were saying, oh, they raided Trump's Mar-a-Lago for political reasons, that's what you told me. That's what John Bolton said himself. Which, by the way, if you think we're making that up, here is the actual video of John Bolton's reaction to the Mar-a-Lago the raid on Trump just a few years ago. And, well, you can clearly see the correlation there. So that's all we're saying.
And I think it's important that everybody take a deep breath here. This is a very serious matter. And it would be better if we could let the legal process play out. I know that may be frustrating to some people, but the seriousness of it itself dictates that we try and proceed in the most orderly way we can.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The legal process should be allowed to play out, whether that's in American federal court for you leaking classified state secrets, or in the International Criminal Court at The Hague when you're finally put on trial for your involvement in the Iraq. I totally agree, John Bolton. 100%. Nobody ought to be above the law. That's, of course, the case. So anyways, you basically get the picture here. They're just acting utterly ridiculous. No self-awareness whatsoever. That said, today Trump is visiting somewhere in D.C., I believe, and he responds here saying that he hasn't been briefed yet on the raid of John Bolton's home. Quote, he doesn't talk. He's a very quiet person except on television, which is interesting because some people are pointing out that the fact that Trump doesn't really have thoughts on this yet could be an indication that the charges or the allegations against Bolton are indeed serious. Here's hoping Here's hoping, because the guy ought to face some consequences after all the problems he caused, not just for America, but for the world as a whole, okay? But take a listen.
No, I don't know about it. I saw it on television this morning. I'm not a fan of John Bolton. He's a real sort of a lowlife. When I hired him, he served a good purpose because, as you know, he was one of the people that forced Bush to do the ridiculous bombings in the Middle East. Bolton, he wants to always kill people, and he's very bad at what he does. But he worked out great for me because every time he doesn't talk, he's like a very quiet person, except on television. He can say something bad about Trump. He'll always do that. But he really doesn't talk. He's quiet. And I'd walk into a room with him with a foreign country, and the foreign country would give me everything because they said, oh no, they're going to get blown up because John Bolton's there.
And yep, that's a completely accurate summary of Mr. Bolton. So as this process plays out, and we'll see where it all goes, but I would just like to say to all the Iraq war veterans who dedicated years of their life and sacrifice and high risk for a lie fundamentally, or the veterans who came home maimed by IEDs, the people who simply did not make it at all, okay? Let this, at the very least, the fact that one of those scumbags is being held accountable for something ever in their life, maybe that ought to be a quiet sense of justice. It's never going to be the full picture, but definitely something I am so pleased to see. Frankly, of all the people in our government that we could hold accountable, that we could bring to justice, Bolton is among one of the most deserving, okay? And that's just simply the case. So even if it's not for war crimes, finally, he gets tripped up on something. It could not happen to a worse individual, truly, truly. So with all of that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. What do you think of the allegations against him? Of course, what do you think of watching the mainstream media fully endorse Bush neocons, as are the Democrat Party? Give me your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.